going on, everybody? This is Mr. Enigma, and you're listening to Mr. Enigma's Pop Culture Queries. Today we're going to be talking about what makes something based on something else, and how close does that have to be really considered based on. We're going to be talking about adaptations, inspired bys, based on, but really we're going to be focusing on Shakespeare, to be perfectly honest. We're going to look at Shakespeare and everything that's been made after that. I have two guests with me today. Today I have Megan. I don't know their names. They just kind of just show up. They just apparate into the room when I'm like, hey, I need guests, and people show up. Yep. And then I also have Iris. Fantastic. So, what are your guys' histories with Shakespeare?
Well, I grew up going to a lot of Shakespeare in the Park and other productions. My dad was an actor. He hasn't been in anything in a while, but he studied theater in college and did a lot of became a software engineer and did theater in his spare time. So I grew up going to a lot of his plays, and so I have long loved Shakespeare since before I could really understand what was happening and what everyone was talking about. Yeah, so the live theater background is where I come from.
So I'm hearing that the computer industry is killing acting. What I'm understanding.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Okay. That's all I got from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Megan, what is your history with Shakespeare?
Yeah. My mom was big in the arts. I was big in the arts. Always loved theater, music. And then kind of got more into Shakespeare in college because we had a guest director in college who was really, really into Shakespeare and explaining and breaking it all down so that it was really understandable, which I think is when I really bit into it and started enjoying Shakespeare.
Okay. My first introduction to Shakespeare was in high school, and I was one of the soldiers in Hamlet that was directly worked with Claudius during the war, because most people don't know there's a war going on in Hamlet. It's just never mentioned because everybody cuts it for all the psychological trauma. I feel like that's something that's I frown upon it, because I feel like that war is really an important part of the political stances of why Claudius became king in the first place, and not why didn't we just bring Hamlet back from college? We're in the middle of a war. So I played one of those soldiers. I had 3 lines in the entire play, and they're like, well, we need to cut for time. So they cut my lines, and I'm just some random soldier. I don't even walk on stage anymore. I just walked across the stage during the one time where Hamlet sees all the injured soldiers for that short stint.
Oh, we had very different experiences with Hamlet.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did you have 5 people playing Hamlet at the same time on stage? Because all of them were his multiple personalities. Yeah, that was the play. We had 5 people playing Hamlet out at the same time, so all of his monologues were dialogue, because they're always arguing with each other.
Okay, that's an interesting choice, that is.
I think interesting is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool when I first heard about it, and then I saw it happen, from the wings, because I was never on stage. And it worked really well.
You got to watch a lot.
Yeah. And it worked for some parts, but other parts we were just they're just all sitting here agreeing with each other. That's cool. What was really cool is the sword fight with Laertes at the end.
So wait. You said they're supposed to be arguing with each other, but they're actually agreeing with each other?
For parts. The Sir Yorick, I knew thee well monologue. Mm-hmm. They're all lamenting this one person.
Right.
So they're all talking about it. But one of them's the ditzy happy one. They don't talk very often in the second half.
Oh no.
And then you had the serious heroic prince one, then you had the anger one, and the one who was always timid and scared. That one was normally the ones hey, what if God punishes me for killing my uncle? That was normally him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so they always broke it down into he goes, oh, what is this line? What is he trying to say? Who should get this emotion? And then they'd argue and they broke up the monologues. The sword fights were really cool because one of them would be parried off stage, and then the other one would come back in with an advance, and you're okay, well, this is pretty cool because you're just switching characters by throwing somebody off stage. So that was a lot of fun. And then my second experience with Shakespeare is I got to, besides reading a lot of it in college and high school, because that's just what they make you read eventually, in college I got cast as the understudy for Paris in Romeo and Juliet. and we had one showing where we just had put the understudies on stage, and
those are the best showings.
Yeah, we were all just in like a black button-down shirt and the black slacks with my black shoes. I remember two things from this. So the first one is that there was a scene, or there's a costume change for, gosh, who is it? Juliet. And I'm talking to Lord Capulet on stage, and we're talking everything like that. So there's normally a scene or a costume change, and so they added an extra like small monologue for Paris to do. I didn't have to learn it because there were no costume changes for the understudies. So we get to going through it and everything like that. And then I finish my last line when Juliet's supposed to enter, and she doesn't enter. And so I'm like, okay, so I know like the first like 6 words of this monologue. So I start it, and then she interrupts me. I'm like, oh, thank God. I was so ready to just be like, I don't know what to do now, guys.
That's the worst thing when your scene partner doesn't show up.
Yeah, so she just comes. She comes in. She's like, okay, and I'm like, you didn't have to change. What are you doing? Those are my two like direct experiences, but they were very directly associated with Shakespeare. Two things first. Hamlet is not played by 5 actors. That was a choice that was made by the director. But we still called it Hamlet because the script was the same. In college, we changed the script for Romeo and Juliet because we could not figure out if it was a good enough reason or just a dumb reason that Romeo didn't get the letter in time because somebody was being slow.
But tangent, I played that character in my college production of Romeo and Juliet that Megan was stage manager for. I played the character that did not deliver the letter in time.
We cut that character. Do you know why? Because Benvolio was Benvolia and was in love with Mercutio.
Okay.
And they were a couple instead of just being best friends.
Okay.
And Benvolia, I'm going to call it Benvolio because it's really dumb to just switch the letters around. Benvolio was in love with Mercutio and blamed Romeo for the death of Mercutio. So he's like, no, you won't get to know. Yeah, it was intentional that he never got the letter, and then comes in, kills himself, and Benvolio's like, yeah, that's on me, guys. So the idea was that we changed the script and changed how it. We didn't change how it ended. It ended the same way. Everyone's dead. But what we did do is we changed the reason why everyone's dead. And I started thinking like, okay, so this is definitely inspired by style or based on or an adaptation. It's definitely not the original work because it's not the original script.
Well, okay, so you cut a part. You cut a character in a scene and that little story arc and reason for that going that direction. Did you add to the script also? Yeah,
but that was one where I had the extra monologue that I didn't need to learn because we had to have extra time. So there were technical reasons. It's the same thing like in high school. We cut a lot of the lines because nobody wants to sit through 3.5 hours of high school Hamlet.
Right. I mean, I think most productions do cut significant portions because a lot of the plays are like 4 hours long. And
definitely.
Modern audiences don't want to sit through that. So.
But the idea of like we added a romance entanglement between Mercutio and Benvolio.
Right.
Like Romeo's two best friends. We wanted to make a romantic entanglement. One of them is now a woman or played by a woman. And so they have this romantic relationship, and we created this entire new ending part of the story. And it would have been fine if it was like, okay, we cut this section or we added this section because it was, it's fine. But we changed the actual narrative, the whole plot, almost. Like the ending result was the same, but the plot was different because
you tweaked the reason for why it gets there.
Yeah, and it's not like it's just that ending moment where we add an entire monologue for Benvolio about why she's not.
Okay, so you did add that.
Oh yeah, there's this entire.
It wasn't just like done non-verbally of like.
Oh no. There's this entire monologue about like, who is it? The friar hands the letter to Benvolio and goes, "Hey, take this to Romeo. He needs to know Juliet's not actually dead, and you need to get to him before he gets the news the other way." And Benvolio has this entire monologue of like, I don't think I will. Because you ruined my entire happiness, and I'm going to ruin yours. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, one, it completely changes the character. And I don't care if, like, you know, it's like played by a man or a woman or anything. Like, I'm just saying, like, the character itself is now spiteful, mm-hmm. angry, and betrays Romeo in this moment, because she blames Mercutio's death on Romeo.
Right. That
change in and of itself, I feel like it doesn't necessarily weaken or strengthen it. I thought that it was fine when we did it or anything and everything, but I didn't think that it changed. I did think that it changed how we could perceive it as a rendition of Romeo and Juliet. I would not say it was directly Romeo and Juliet. You know what I mean? We still called it that because nobody will see a play called Kinda Romeo and Juliet. Or maybe I would, because I'd be curious about what kind of Romeo and Juliet.
I would go see Kinda Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, that sounds fun. Like, I didn't see your production, but based on your description, I think that adds something that is in keeping with the themes of Romeo and Juliet and of tragedy generally.
Oh, definitely.
That it's not a simple mistake that causes this tragedy. It's lots of decisions. It's lots of individual characters making decisions based on how they're feeling in that moment, and they're changing relationships with each other.
Oh yeah, like
and so I think it fits really well into
that's what I appreciate about it, is that for Romeo and Juliet, one of the main themes is Worcestershire sauce, rash decisions, and teenage angst, which are two of the main plot points for the entire play. And then we take a moment with a character who's not really involved with the plot of the play. He's just there.
I remember Benvolio as a character, but I really don't remember much about the character, right? Like you said, it changes the character. I'm like, okay, but from what? Like you
could have had Romeo and Mercutio and friend number 2.
Yeah.
And would not. You could have gotten the exact same place.
So you're adding an interesting arc for.
Yes, you're adding more to this one character.
Really have that much nuance.
Mm-hmm. And even if it was like a good change or a bad change, I feel like it was a good change. I feel like it could have added more. I definitely still think that because you changed the script in and of itself and the story components, because you're like, that missing letter is an important point. How that letter becomes missing is kind of a gray area of like, is that part of the plot? The plot is the letter does not reach Romeo.
Right.
But I feel like because you changed that and then you added monologues, and not only was it just like the ending part where Benvolio is this character who changes, it also at the beginning where they're like, oh, there's this romantic relationship, and it's shown, they don't really change the script there, but it's shown that there's this romantic relationship between Benvolio and Mercutio through until Mercutio dies. So
I think that if it had not substantially changed the script, if this had all been done with the original script using nonverbal cues to tell this story, it would definitely still be Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare.
Yes, absolutely.
Now that you're actually adding monologues, even cutting monologues, I would say it's probably still Shakespeare, because that's how almost every production of Shakespeare is done, is cutting large portions of it.
So it's Shakespeare abridged.
Right. Yeah. Which is not Shakespeare.
Which is not Shakespeare.
Right. But I would say that if you're cutting some aspects and leaving most of the play intact, it's still Shakespeare. But if you at the point where you're writing new material, then you're getting to a gray area of is this really Shakespeare's play?
Yeah. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot about whether or not Shakespeare wrote his own plays or whatnot, because like, you can make an argument, well, he didn't write any of his plays, so if you can add things, then you're not really changing Shakespeare, because Shakespeare's Shakespeare no matter who writes it. We did keep it in pentameter, so that everything stayed the same for the monologues. Huge. Everything was like, my acting professor is the one who actually changed it. Oh, I'd like to jump into the idea of like adaptations versus based on versus inspired by. Mm-hmm. So an adaptation, from my personal standpoint, is it's a moving from one media to another. An adaptation is changing it from a stage play script to a film, or a straight play into a I hate that term. A normal play.
No such thing as a straight play.
There's no such thing as a straight play.
Right.
But having like a normal play into a musical, or even a movie into a musical, Beetlejuice, Mean Girls,
Yeah,
Legally Blonde, yes.
Mm-hmm.
All of these are like stories that take place in a movie,
Mhm.
and they're like, well, what if we added some jazz hands and a dance number?
Mhm.
Some of these already have jazz hands and dance numbers, like Beetlejuice.
Right, but it's moving from one medium to another, so you might that will involve some changes to make it fit
Yeah.
the new medium.
So it's considered an adaptation because it's adapting to the new thing.
Yeah.
Being based on something is where I kind of scratch my head, because how close does it have to be to something to still be based on that thing?
Mhm.
Are you allowed to change the ending? Are you allowed to, like, it's one thing you're like, hey, we're doing Richard II in high school. Haha.
Right, I mean, like, stage productions of Shakespeare do that all the time. They're like,
Yeah.
it's this play, and we're setting it in the Wild West.
Yeah. And we're yeah, exactly.
Which, like, is that still Shakespeare? I don't know.
Yeah, like, but if it's not like, and even if it's like just telling the same plot point by plot point story, you can still say it's based on. Because you don't have to change you don't need to keep the same dialogue, words. Shakespeare's really hard, especially if you're trying to do it in high school and you're like, yeah, kids don't talk like that. So like, it's one thing if you're like, oh, we're doing Romeo and Juliet in high school, and you keep all the words and still call it Romeo and Juliet.
Mhm.
But if you change it enough, you're like, we're not doing iambic pentameter anymore.
Mhm.
We're not doing soliloquies. The monologues are pretty short, but we're telling the exact point by point plot of the play. I can still consider it based on. It's when you start changing plot points that it really bothers me, and I want to advocate for the use of the words inspired by for a lot of these.
Okay.
People, like, there's a whole thing about The Lion King. People say it is based on Hamlet. I say, no, it is not. One, it's based on an African king from the 13th century. But also, like, even if it was based on Hamlet, I would not say it's based on Hamlet, because Simba's still alive at the end.
It's not a tragedy at all.
Nala didn't drown herself.
Yeah. Mhm.
The only thing that's the same is that Scar killed Mufasa.
Right. Which is a common theme in all of history, right?
Yeah.
Kings,
Mhm.
brothers killing their
Cain and Abel,
brothers,
things like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like one of those things where, like,
Mhm.
brothers killing brothers to become king is a very common thing that's happened not only in stories, but in history.
Yeah.
It's a thing it's normal. That's terrible. It's not normal. Don't kill your brothers to become king. But it is a thing that has happened at a regular occurrence, no matter how bad it is. Did I fix that?
Don't cut that out. Leave that disclaimer.
Yeah, so, like, I wouldn't say that is... I can see where the characters are in it that match up. Like,
Right.
Zazu is Polonius. Nobody ever thinks about that. But, like, he's not stabbed behind a curtain. In fact, he's a good guy.
Right, so is he even Polonius? Like,
Well, that's the thing. He's the king's advisor.
right. So
But
by proximity, but yeah. Well, here's the thing about the term inspired by is, like, I feel like that is a very broad term. I feel like that is the loosest possible connection. I mean, I can be inspired by something. I can be inspired by a song and then write a movie and have those be... The song may not be present in the movie for the viewer to see, but it still inspired me to write the movie.
Mhm.
So I would say that if something can resemble the original product near enough or has the same themes, I feel like we could say that's based on.
I feel the same way. I think if it has, more than 3 or 4 things that are the same or very, very similar, I feel like that's based on. It's inspired to me feels more like, what's that musical that I like? It's the one that's set in the Renaissance.
The one about eggs?
Maybe. Yeah.
Something Rotten?
Yeah, Something Rotten. Really good. Look it up.
Eggs.
The one about eggs, yes. But to my knowledge, that's not based on factual evidence of any kind. So like that, I would say inspired by the Renaissance time period, inspired by things that their version of Shakespeare could have done, would have done, etc. When the majority of the things are not, directly copied, that feels like inspired to me.
How much do you need to change before it's no longer based on?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like inspired by, I feel like if the ending is different, you can't call it, well, if the ending is different in the plot, maybe the themes could stay the same. Or maybe if the themes are different, it's kind of a big thing. But, for example, like, the animated classic Hercules, what is that based on? Zeus being a good father? The story of Hercules getting tricked by Hera to kill his wife and children and having to go through trials to kill these monsters? What is that based on? It's that one I would say is inspired by, but people are like, but it's called Hercules. We were talking about Shakespeare.
At some point, yeah.
We touched on Shakespeare.
We touched on Shakespeare for a little. So
The Lion King.
we talked about The Lion King. So the one I wanted to talk about was My Own Private Idaho. Keanu Reeves' character is based on Henry V. In the plot of Henry IV Part 1 and Henry IV Part 2 and the end of the beginning of Henry V.
Right, so for context, the Shakespeare plays, there's 3 plays, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V. And you have this same character who will become Henry V, but he's currently a prince, Prince Hal.
Yeah.
And we see him in the first play being very raucous and not behaving very princely and hanging out with these people in a tavern. And
his story in the movie, Keanu Reeves' character, Scott, is a male prostitute who hangs out with River Phoenix, who's also a male prostitute named Mikey, in Portland, Oregon. Scott's dad is the mayor of Portland. He's not a prostitute for necessity. He does it because his dad hates it, kind of thing. Like, some people do drugs, some people get tattoos. He decided male prostitution was the way to go, and he stuck with it. So, one of the things that happens is that, like, you have this struggling power dynamic with, Scott's dad, who is Henry IV, and Scott, who is Prince Hal. And so there's that struggle distance dynamic because the father wants him to grow up and like, take over and, be ready for this, and the prince only wants to just party. That's where the correlation between the two kind of ends. There are some characters that show up that are associated with the play that come through. Henry IV is going to war, asks this dude for help, and dude's like, no, you haven't appreciated me and my family and what we've done for you enough. So I'm going to build my own army. And he's like, well, screw you then. And so he builds his army, and then they fight. And Prince Hal kills him. And then What's-His-Face takes credit for it. There are characters that are associated with these other characters and all that stuff. But what it is just a road trip movie about trying to find the character who's not in any of the Shakespeare Henrys. They're trying to find that dude's mom. They're trying to find Mikey's mom. And you're like,
instead
okay.
of having a war, their challenge is to search for this person.
Road trip, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And it doesn't have anything to do with the war. Scott is not the main character in this movie.
Scott is the Prince Hal character.
Scott is Prince Hal. He's not the main character in this movie. Also, Scott's dad, the mayor, is not in the movie a whole lot in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think
so. It's like
Henry IV isn't actually in Henry IV very much.
Yeah,
from my memory.
Yeah. So I say it's inspired by. I wouldn't say it's based on. Even though it does keep a lot of the growing up and taking responsibility in the mantle of your father attributes for the end of the movie versus the end of the play, and when Prince Hal becomes Henry V. It kind of builds to this moment of him being the adult now, you know what I mean? So even though they kept that themes, I still wouldn't say that it's based on. I'd say it's inspired by, because I can have a ton of coming-of-age stories.
Sure, that have those same themes.
Have those same themes, and I wouldn't be like, that's Henry IV. Like, no, that's Rugrats.
Yeah. I feel like part of it, too, is like, based on is your, like, the maker of the art is intentionally trying to recreate this story, you know, versus
the intention
inspired by is it just so happens to look the same, like it could be a coincidence.
Well, inspired by, I feel like the creator of the new content has to acknowledge that gave them an idea for something.
Right, because like
what
I was
they do with
saying
it,
earlier, like it may not be recognizable to the viewer.
Yeah.
So inspired by almost it just has to come up when talking to the creator.
Yeah. So for example, like I could say that I wouldn't say that even though they share a lot of the same styles and themes, Star Wars: The Revenge of the Sith is not Othello. Even though they have like climbs the ranks of a military regiment to a general, and does not get the respect that they deserve from their peers, and is tricked by somebody that they assumed was a friend to betray the people that they love and kill their wife.
Right. So similar themes.
Similar plot, because that's the same plot. But George Lucas says it's an original idea. So, it's an original idea. He would never say it's based on Othello.
Right, so it's almost like we need another category for things that resemble other things, but the creator did not intend them to be inspired by, based on, or adaptations of the original material.
Yes, yeah. At what point do you call it inspired by then? Because I wouldn't say that inspired by is that they did not know about it or that they did not accept it as part of their thing.
Right. Inspiration implies that it was like a spark for beginning this process.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the kindling that started this in something else. Going back to My Own Private Idaho, it's covering, 15 hours of play?
Right. Because it's 3
in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And so and it's not really about a war. It's not about a father-son struggle because he's not the main character. It's like a subplot. I'd say it's inspired by it. Or there's also fan fiction. Is fan fiction
definitely inspired by?
Inspired by. It's your own story that happens to pull characters from other things.
Right.
Based on would be more of the idea of we're taking the plot and changing it a little, or changing the setting, or something of that along that line.
So, okay, I feel like we need to talk about the difference now then between based on an adaptation.
Okay, yeah.
Because an adaptation can change substantial parts of something. You can change the setting, or certain superficial aspects of the characters.
Yeah.
To make it fit into another medium, right?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like even if you changed, you could change the words for an adaptation.
Right.
For example, I know this is a really weird example and I keep going back to Star Wars, but have you seen those Shakespeare Star Wars scripts?
No.
Oh, they take the entire script for A New Hope, or they've done it for all of them, but I think I own A New Hope around here somewhere. But it's written in iambic pentameter like it's Shakespeare, and it's the entire script for Star Wars 4.
Okay.
So,
Right, so that's an interesting... They're adapting a film into a Shakespearean style play.
Yeah, so I would call that an adaptation, because Shakespearean iambic pentameter is a very specific style of play, or movie even. It's just because it's a specific style, you can change it into that. Because it's like changing something to a high school rom-com, which was what they did with Taming of the Shrew.
Right.
You can change something to that, but as long as you keep the main points that go through, it'll interweave and make sense. But if you change... What hangs me up is the endings. Can you make Romeo and Juliet a happy story? If nobody dies at the end, is it really Romeo and Juliet?
I would say then it's based on.
Based on. Not inspired by.
I would say based on because... it depends how tangential the plot and characters are. If it's majority the same, and you would say it's an adaptation except that they changed how it ended, then I would say it's based on.
Okay, let's actually jump to Romeo and Juliet. I'm going to list up a couple of things that are different from the original plot and the movie.
Other than the fact that they're all gnomes.
That live in...
gnomes?
Is that the first point?
the garden.
So what else is different?
Okay, so they're called Reds and Blues. There's no king. They're just two yards that hate each other. There's no prince, there's no king, there's nobody to stop them. They're just two people who hate each other. And there's no gray area. There's no, like, you know how there's, like, in Romeo and Juliet, there are two families that hate each other, and they're friends who hate each other. But there's, like, a large populace that doesn't give a shit about this feud.
Right.
So there are people...
They're two families, they're not, like, entire communities.
Yeah, these are like two, for lack of better phrasing, two, like, countries that border each other that hate each other. There's no other... Everybody in one country hates the other side. And there's no gray area. There's nobody, like...
There's
no
like, outside element to try to, like, even it out or anything.
Exactly. Mercutio is cut. There's no Mercutio in this. No Mercutio in this. There is a guy named Benny and a really long hat, and the death of Mercutio is they cut off his hat.
Okay, so he's Mercutio.
That's the thing. No, his hat is Mercutio. Because they only kill his hat.
Is he Benvolio then?
He's Benvolio.
He's Benvolio.
He's Benvolio. His hat is Mercutio because they cut off his hat.
It's very dramatic. If you haven't seen that movie, it's hilarious.
And then, there is one character that kind of is in the middle, and it's Flamingo.
Okay.
Like a lawn flamingo.
Is there a friar character?
I think he is the friar character.
Okay.
Because he's the one who is there when they're married. Because they have, like, it's a fake marriage scene, but it very heavily implies a marriage just happened.
Featherstone is his name.
Featherstone. So you have that character, but he's the only one who's out there. The next thing that happens is that everybody starts throwing rocks at Nomeo because he killed Tybalt.
Yeah.
He goes into exile, but the only reason he makes it to exile is because everyone thinks he's dead.
Okay, so everyone thinks Romeo is dead.
Dead, yes. Mm-hmm. Because everybody watched him die.
They think they watched
him die.
Okay. He, like, rolls into the street, and then a truck comes by, and when the truck passes him, there's this, like, shattered porcelain on the ground.
Okay.
And then you find out later that it's, like, this truck that was carrying teacups, and the trunk was open, and so it was, like, a teacup that fell out of the truck, and was crashed on the ground, and Nomeo, whatever the hell his name is, he, like, grabbed onto the truck before it hit him. So then he has to, like, all this nonsense of getting back.
Okay, so then it's kind of a reversal then. So then Juliet thinks that Nomeo is dead.
Everybody does, yeah.
And kills herself?
No. She gets super glued to a statue. And just has to stay there
her
forever.
social life is dead.
Okay. We're going metaphorically. So at this point, I feel like we're totally off the rails of Romeo and Juliet, right? Like, so far, it's been pretty close. They've made a couple minor tweaks.
Yeah. It gets weirder.
But, okay.
Benny, to avenge Nomeo, who he thinks is dead, orders a $1,000 lawnmower to destroy the other yard. So they go into an actual turf war and start fighting each other. Nomeo shows up to save the day and be like, hey guys, I'm not dead, please stop fighting. But also this lawnmower has gone rogue, is going to crash into this tower that Juliet is now super glued to. And so it runs and crashes into them, and then all the things fall on top of them, and everybody thinks that they're both dead now. They didn't kill themselves. And that's when they make up. The families make up because, I'm sorry your son's dead. I'm sorry your daughter's dead. And it's because they didn't kill each other. It's because Nomeo decided not to jump away when the lawnmower attacked. And so they both got crushed. But then they're both fine. Because the children's movie, it opens up and they're like, oh, they're fine, yay. And now we're all friends. Also, Paris ends up with Juliet's handmaiden.
Is this the nurse?
Which is just
the nurse.
The nurse.
Sorry. Benny never gets his hat back. But Benny ends up with a porcelain doll that was inside the house, I guess.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those, like, creepy dolls in the frilly dresses that are, like, porcelain and they sit on the shelf that, like, your creepy aunt has, and it looks like it's staring at you all the time. One of those. Yeah.
So he ends up with her.
Okay, so they basically just turned it into a comedy, right, with the typical Shakespearean comedy ending of everyone has to have someone they're paired with at the end.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah. Also, they race lawnmowers.
Yeah, instead of, like, sword fights.
Yeah, I think the lawnmower kind of thing was, like, the biggest thing that got me. It's like, now that there's this turf war, and he's, like, actively trying to kill the entire rest of the other side.
Right, that's different than tit for tat, like...
The prince coming in and be like, hey, you killed Tybalt, he goes, but he killed Mercutio, goes, okay, well, you're exiled because I need peace in my kingdom, and you guys won't have that if you guys keep trying to kill each other.
Yeah, but they've changed it to like outright war.
Yes. Oh, actively, yes.
Yeah.
So, is that based on or inspired by, even though it's called Romeo and Juliet?
See,
well, it's definitely not an adaptation, I'll tell you that.
I would still say based on, because, like, a lot of the characters are the same. They tried to, or at least, like, if not based on outright, like, based on the characters in
right, like
Romeo and Juliet.
There's a lot of analogs. It sounds like most of the characters are there in some form.
They hit a lot of the main plot points. Like, even if you didn't hit them exactly, like, neither one of them dies, they don't kill themselves, but there is that brief moment where everyone thinks that they have died.
Is dead, or thinks both of them are
dead.
Yeah.
Well, I got a different answer from you guys when you guys said that fan fiction is inspired by and not based on, but it uses the same characters.
So my understanding, I mean, I guess it depends on the fan fiction, because it can take a lot of different forms, but when I think of fan fiction, I think of taking the same characters and putting them in completely new situations.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what I feel like this movie is.
But it's not completely new situations.
I feel like
it starts off in the same situation.
Yeah. It's majority the same.
Like a different flavor of situation, but still the same situation. And then it's not until, like, the last third of it that it sounds like it starts to diverge.
The third act is where it really diverges, but, like, even, like, the first and second act, like, they don't meet at a party. Okay. They meet because she's...
But they are both in disguise.
They're both in disguise. Well,
so they keep that.
But they're both in disguise, and then they both find out that they're red and blue. So they can't like each other, but they do like each other.
Mm-hmm. So while we're on the subject of Romeo and Juliet, do you want to talk about West Side Story?
Yeah. I feel like West Side Story could be based on... Because the only thing that they change is only one of them dies.
Right.
Because, what's her name? Maria? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Maria doesn't die at the end of that. So it's like... But, like, the plot itself is not about families. Well, it's about a gang war. So it's not like it's... It could be considered family depending on who you ask what a gang is. Sure. So they've got that style.
You've got social groupings, right?
Yes.
And in this, unlike how you described the gnomes, they are two groups inside a neutral community.
Yes, right? Exactly.
There's the police that act as, like, the prince.
Yes, so they're like they're actively against, like, not against each other. They're against each other, but the world is not about this entire fight. How do you feel if they add themes? Like, they add, like, racial tension and aggression.
Right, I mean, I think you could add it in a stage production of it and still call it Romeo and Juliet by just your casting and choices in how you stage it, like, without having to change a lot. I think you can add themes to stage productions all the time.
Just by the direction?
Just by the direction, yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, they kept a lot of the themes that were in Romeo and Juliet. You know, like the star-crossed lovers and all of that stuff. I feel like where it differs from Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story is that West Side Story is still a tragedy.
Right. So if anything, West Side Story is more similar to the original source material, even though it seems as different on the surface level, right? On the surface level, very different setting.
Yeah,
different characters, but they all fulfill the same roles in the plot.
Yeah, so
similar, almost the same.
Even though West Side Story doesn't follow the plot directly, I feel like the motifs and themes in it are still the same.
Yeah.
But in Romeo and Juliet, there was no, like, teenage angst rebellion except for that Juliet had an overprotective dad. Romeo's mom didn't give a shit what he did. So it wasn't like it was, like, active rebellion. It was active tactical warfare instead. And so I feel like that the themes of, like, teenage angst, poor decision-making because of emotions, that was there. That was actually there a lot.
It's interesting, though, because it sounds like Romeo and Juliet are not actually very active participants in the story in the way that they are in Romeo and Juliet and in West Side Story. It's about, like, them making bad decisions.
Oh, yes.
Whereas it sounds like a lot more of the plot in Romeo and Juliet is based on community actions.
Yes. So the bad decisions that are made in this are not directly them. They don't really make decisions in general, except for, hey, do you want to see each other again tomorrow? Sure. That's really the only decisions that they make.
Yeah.
There is a struggle between self and community, but they touch on it for like 30 seconds and then drop it. Basically, like, Nomeo is hanging out with Juliet all day, comes home, and his late father's prized toiletry is been vandalized. And the mom's like, where were you? He's like, I'm out. And so he couldn't be there to protect it, one. And two, he decided that after that, he was going to go fumigate the entire backyard and kill all of the flowers back there. And Juliet catches it. And he's like, I had to do this because my community needed me to. We needed to get revenge for a tree.
Okay. I wanted to circle back to what you were saying about adding that character arc for Benvolio in that original.
Yeah.
Because the character of Anita is, I think, one of the most compelling characters in West Side Story. And she, I don't know what analog she is in Romeo and Juliet.
Oh.
But she has that role of, she's supposed to go and tell Tony, who's the Romeo character, that Maria, the Juliet character, is coming to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, because she runs into the other gang and they try to assault her, she instead says she's dead. Right? So that's that failure to deliver the letter being transformed into this emotional reaction and decision.
Yeah.
That sets off this misunderstanding and leads to more tragedy.
Oh yeah.
So that reminded me of the change in your
that's a good correlation I haven't made before. Characters that I really like, if it's done really well, are characters that seem like almost narrator types, but you don't know that they're the narrator until afterwards. And it's not like it's a big reveal that they're the narrator. I think the main one is like Horatio.
Yeah.
Horatio. I feel like Horatio's like the one who told the story. Because he was there for every plot point. He knows everything that happens.
Right.
And so, like, at the end, he's the one who has the last lines.
Yeah, isn't there a line saying, like, does Hamlet have a line telling Horatio to tell the story? Or does
I think it's something like that in his final moments, is that he's like, after Goodnight Sweet Prince, he's like, the story will live on, kind of thing.
That's right. Horatio says that.
So Horatio says it after Hamlet has died in his alarms. So it's like, it almost feels like he is the narrator for the whole story, because he knows the whole story.
Just by being present, you're calling him the narrator.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I know that it's not a direct correlation because it does affect the plot, but I feel like Anita was almost that character, because Anita knows what's going on and has that thing going through the entire thing.
Right.
But one decision by Anita changed the ending.
Yeah.
For Romeo and Juliet, if I had one, in the original part, I couldn't think of one, because nobody actually knew what was going on the entire time.
Right, and that's
except
part
for maybe
of the tragedy,
Nurse.
right? Is the
maybe Nurse, because Nurse knew that they were married. So Nurse knew everything that was going on, and Nurse couldn't. I think what makes it really tragic is Nurse did not have the power to change anything.
Right. But also, the Nurse didn't know necessarily what was going on with Romeo, or that the letter was not. It doesn't know that the letter was not delivered, right?
Yeah. So
it's kind of this separation of information, where like certain people know certain things, but there's no communication.
Yeah, because
there's breakdowns in communication. That's almost what causes the tragedy.
Yeah, that breakdown in communication, I think, is the key plot point for Romeo and Juliet. And I think if it doesn't have that in there, we can't call it Romeo and Juliet. Because there is no breakdown in miscommunication in Romeo and Juliet. People think he's dead, but he comes back, and everybody's like, okay, cool, and then they die.
Right. The misunderstanding doesn't cause more tragedy.
Yes, it causes her to be super glued to the thing, which in turn Benny orders the lawnmower, and in turn she almost gets killed by it. And
okay, so indirectly.
Indirectly through like 7 hoops. It's the same thing, but really it's not. Another one that I wanted to talk about. Nobody agrees that Lion King 2 is Romeo and Juliet, right?
Okay, so the only similarities I'm seeing to Romeo and Juliet here are
Star-crossed lovers, so one of them gets exiled.
Lovers, one of them gets exiled.
There's no fake death.
There's nothing else,
No.
right? Like
no. But
the
like,
way they meet, the relationship between the would-be murderer and the king, like
yeah,
totally
like,
different.
They're yeah. So it feels more like inspired by.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Was it though? I mean, right? Because then it comes down to intention. Are the creators of it saying this is Romeo and Juliet?
I don't know, but they did make Lion King 1.5, which is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and they did make Lion King, which everybody says is Hamlet. Whether or not it is actually Hamlet is up for debate. But
do they say that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is dead? Is the Lion King 1.5 based on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead because of the
Lion
Hamlet
King is
connection?
Hamlet, yeah. So that's the reason why it's that the connection. They never outright say that Lion King 1.5 is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. They say, "Hey, have you ever wondered what the side characters are doing while they're not on screen?
Mm-hmm.
This is what it is." And this is an entire movie about Timon and Pumbaa at the exact same time as what's happening to Simba. So they go to Pride Rock during he's being held up.
Okay, so it's pretty similar then. Yeah, okay.
So, like, occasionally Simba will just, like, interweave into it, and you're like, oh, well, there's this moment, and this is the part of the movie where we do the hula luau, and then we're separated, like, oh, now we're both fighting, but we're watching Simba fight in Lion King, and now we're watching them fight. And then it comes back, and they're all together again.
Okay, yeah, that seems like the same concept as Rosen.
So it's similar to that. Nobody's dying. It doesn't go into an existential crisis of why do I need to die at the end of the play. It's like, because that's your destiny kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Which is arguable about what that actual themes are of that. But there's none of that. It's really just like, hey, you guys like Timon and Pumbaa? Do you guys want to see more Timon and Pumbaa? That's what. And it was a cash grab.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are way past our time, and I feel like we still haven't come down to where do we draw the line on these. So far, we know that it has to have the same themes. Mostly, it can have like add additional themes be added in, but it has to keep the same main themes. I still feel like if you're, basing it on a tragedy, it should stay a tragedy. If you're basing it on a comedy, it should stay a comedy. What do you guys think? I want to just have some closing thoughts. Steph's going to cut out most of this anyway, so we're probably only going to have like 15 minutes of usable material. I think the original question is how close does it have to be to the original works to still be considered based on?
I would say there are elements that are very important to an original story, like theme, the core aspects of a character, and then there are elements that are less crucial, like the superficial setting, the superficial, character names and, attributes. But in order to be based on, it really needs to keep those core aspects of the characters and the core themes.
The core intentions and the core, yeah. I
Okay.
agree.
So can we agree that Romeo and Juliet is inspired by and not based on them? They cut characters.
I think so.
They cut Mercutio.
I think it's towing the
a real
line,
gray area for me because there are. It sounds like there are the majority of the characters are still there. The hat is Mercutio. It's there.
I mean,
I feel like for me, it's like the first half is based on, and the second half is inspired by.
That's easy because the first half of Romeo and Juliet is a comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
And they just took the comedy part and continued. It's as if they continued the comedy.
Yeah.
And never got to the tragedy.
So,
that's interesting.
That's one of my favorite parts about when Romeo and Juliet is that the first half is hilarious. It is really funny if you can understand what they're talking about. I wanted to imagine it like reading it or watching it for the first time, and it wasn't a famous play. Mm-hmm. You're just watching it, and you're like, okay, this show's really funny. It's like really funny, and then you watch Mercutio get stabbed.
You're like, oh my god!
And then he dies, and you're just like,
less funny.
Oh, that's awful. And then he kills Tybalt, and you're like, oh shit, oh god, what's going on? And you're like, okay, well he got revenge. That's good. He goes, now he's exiled. What? And then you just watch all this spiraling downhill of everything that happens afterwards, from this like hour and a half of comedy to everything else that happens afterwards. Yeah. I really wanted to be there. I really want to be there in that moment when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting perspective to think about, because pretty much everyone, even if they don't know anything else about Romeo and Juliet, they know they die at the end.
Yeah.
And so you can never have that experience at like going to see that story now.
I know that they're going to die at the end. This is really funny and all, but like...
It almost colors it, doesn't it? Like, you can't fully enjoy the comedy because there's like, it's tinged with tragedy.
And they say that in the beginning, like, this is a tragedy.
That's true. That's true.
And you're like, okay. If you watch it just like a snowball of how much worse it can possibly get every single time. And it's not like any of his other plays do that. Hamlet doesn't do that.
There's some funny scenes at the beginning of Hamlet.
Hamlet has Hamlet. Okay, so every single Shakespeare play is just lines of dick jokes and then people dying. Like that. That's just like most of the first half of Romeo and Juliet, to be perfectly honest. And then when you get to like the actual tragedy parts. But if we're like looking at like Hamlet is already upset at the very beginning. You find out from the very beginning that his father was murdered. That's the ghost in Act 1, Scene 2. Right. Mm-hmm. So, like, you know that
it starts off a little more serious.
It starts off like way serious. But Romeo and Juliet, as much as I feel that it is overplayed and overdone and saturating the media that we know and love, I feel like it, in its time, was probably one of his best works because of how it tumbles into this awful tragedy starting at such a high point, and how this small little speck turned into this giant snowball that leaves 9 people dead. Yeah, so that was my tangent. Anyway, I feel like we got the basis idea. We have to keep the theme. Okay, one last thing I wanted to do. We're going to build a quick mental pyramid, and so the bottom we're going to have themes, right? Like that was the most important thing for
the bottom is the most important things.
Yeah. It's the base of what makes it so that it can be based on. The base of based on.
Like a food pyramid.
Like food pyramids.
Yeah. Okay.
Like a 90s food pyramid, because they changed it. Yes. Now it's wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. So the base of the pyramid has to be the most important thing that has to stay for it to be based on, and then the very top. Is going to be
the things that can change.
The things that they can change, and then, but as soon as we get rid of like a certain level, we're like, okay, this is not the same thing. So like the base thing is going to be maybe I should say plot, because it really like the points that happen that cause the next thing to happen.
Okay.
So
the structure of it.
Mercutio getting stabbed,
/structure.
Him killing Tybalt, him going into exile, Juliet faking her death, Romeo never getting the letter, Romeo killing Paris, Romeo killing himself, and Juliet killing herself because Romeo's dead. The key things that needed to happen for the plot to develop are the key ones. You didn't need Paris to show up. You didn't need to kill Paris. Paris was kind of just an innocent bystander who just like is the poor schmuck who just was in the wrong place at the wrong time when Romeo was going on a rampage.
But that is crucial to him being exiled and then setting up to the...
Paris?
No, it's crucial to Romeo being exiled.
Yes, because then Juliet would never have tried to kill herself.
Right.
Or pretend to
be dead. Yeah.
Pretend to be dead. So, and then...
So, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be Paris, but you need some reason that Romeo is exiled. Right.
Well, Romeo is exiled because he kills Tybalt. The reason why Juliet pretends to die is because she's betrothed to Paris and doesn't want to be. And she's like, take me, I'm already married. So she fakes her death so that
Paris, the killing of Paris is kind of tangential.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so so you could cut Paris from the story. It takes away from the story as a whole, but it doesn't necessarily drive the plot forward. So I feel like the key plot driving points is the base for me, not necessarily the story, because Paris is part of the story, but he's not a part of the plot. But that's because I think that you shouldn't change the story if you're going to base it on something.
So I think we were saying, regardless of the size of the plot is the base of the pyramid.
Yeah, that's what mine is. I don't know if you guys agree. Well, what would you guys put as the most important thing that cannot be changed for it to be based on?
I would say theme.
The themes?
I think themes are the heart of the piece, right? So, if you have the same plot, but somehow you've lost a theme, then I don't think it's the same. I think it's lost its soul.
The hard part with me for themes is that, like, you can add themes, but you can't subtract themes. But also, how do you know which themes are in it? If I said that the themes of Romeo and Juliet are not teenage angst and poor decision making, but it's actually the hatred of your forefathers and why you should abandon it.
Yeah, I think that's a valid choice of the theme, right?
But what if we cut one of them?
Sure.
But kept the other two?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if it would be recognizably Romeo and Juliet if you took any of them out.
But we kept one of those in Lion King 2. The two families hated each other. There was no poor decision making. Well,
right. So in that case, yeah, you need all of them.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. We need all the themes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I think that's a fair argument to make that the bottom of the pyramid. Then, if we're saying thematically, you need to have all of them most of the time, as a general rule, versus plot points where you can have most of them and still be okay.
That's a good way of categorizing it, right?
That's a good point. Let's say themes are at the bottom, and then plot points is the next. Points.
You can take a few of them out as long as your structure is still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then characters?
I'd say setting, specifically like place and time setting.
Interesting, because I don't think that's very important in an adaptation or being based on.
For example, 10 Things I Hate About You is high school in the 90s.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm saying it's how many layers does our pyramid have?
Oh.
I'm picturing like
5.
like a 3 or 4 layer pyramid.
Okay.
So
you're putting that
I'm near the top of my pyramid.
I would say characters would be next for me, but only because somebody needs to do something in the play for the play to continue. So if you don't have that drive of what's causing the plot to keep moving, you need the characters to stay generally the same if the plot's going to stay generally the same.
Well, that's a good point, right?
Yeah, that's true.
The plot and the characters are kind of interlinked.
Yeah, so if I have the plot and I need specific plot points to happen, and I need these themes to be matching up with the plot so that it keeps that as well, the characters can't stray too far from that. We can't make a timid, scared Romeo because he would have never gone to the party.
He wouldn't do the things that he needs to do in the plot
to make it so it would continue.
Yeah.
So I feel like the character would be next because you have to keep
characterization of the
events of the play,
people, things. Yeah.
Yes. So
characterization of the characters.
Yes. So
the personalities.
The fact that the nurse became a sassy frog best friend, I don't think that really changed anything for me in Romeo and Juliet because she was still that character for Juliet who she can confide into.
The confidant, yeah.
But she was a different character as a whole. So she played the role in the plot as the confidant, but she didn't actually do it the same way. So I feel like that's where it is for me. You have to keep the character the same enough so that they follow into the plot.
Yeah. But they can make the same plots and themes occur through different means that are more true to that interpretation of the character.
Exactly.
And it's still okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I agree with that.
Yeah. So I feel like the character would be next. So as long as we can keep the plot and themes moving and those the same, we need to have a character that does that. The setting, I feel like, is probably the least important for me. Specifically because I can, I know you haven't watched it yet, but Forbidden Planet is very, very close to The Tempest. And it is set in space. And they take a spaceship and land it on a planet, moon thing, and all that stuff.
Right. But it's still a ship.
Instead of an island,
yeah.
Exactly.
A spaceship. Yeah.
Where you set it is irrelevant as long as you have the key elements to match it up.
Yeah.
Another adaptation, which is probably my favorite adaptation of all time, is Sesame Street's Waiting for Elmo. Which is Waiting for Godot.
I have not seen this.
Oh my god. It's like, do you know when Elmo's gonna get here? No. I'm bored. And that's pretty much it.
Oh my god.
It's on YouTube. Please go find it. It is a treat. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like we nailed down the pyramid.
You want to lay out our pyramid one more time all together for our listeners?
So Steph's gonna have a thing on there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Steph, do the thing.
Steph, do the
Put
thing.
It here. Thank you.
Put it right here, next to my face, right here. Yeah, bigger, smaller, bigger. Okay. We have our themes, which is the main meat of the play, what the play's about. What we're trying to portray through the play. The key plot points that drive the themes. It's the way I would put it. The thing that makes it so that the end of the play happens.
That makes sense.
The characters.
Specifically how they drive the plot points and the themes.
Characters that drive the plot points and the themes, and then the setting, because the setting can be literally anywhere. We just need to figure out how it'll fit into everything else. For an adaptation of a play like Waiting for Godot that doesn't have plot points, and the themes are so convoluted and Samuel Beckett will never tell us what it's about, how do we just take those first two if we only have the characters and the setting? I could say Red October is Waiting for Godot.
Because the characters and setting are the same?
Because anything could be there, because the setting is not there.
There isn't really a setting either, is there?
No. They're by a rock and a tree. That's the amount of information it gives you. A dead tree and a rock. Okay, anyway, we have the pyramid. We've discussed what it is. One last thing is what would you be able to take off with it still being able to be there? You said that the themes have to stay. Is that the only thing that needs to stay?
Plot points.
The plot points need to stay for it to be based on... Well,
to be based on, because adaptation, I think...
Adaptation, everything needs to be pretty much the same, except for you need to move it into a new medium.
You need to move it into a new medium, and I think the setting can change for an adaptation.
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we've got it. I think we understand that, like, you can't really change the themes. It has to keep the same themes so that you know what the core is about what you're trying to tell. Mm-hmm. You want to tell it in generally the same way that you did before.
Meaning plot.
Meaning plot.
Mm-hmm. And characters.
And the characters that go along with the plot. But how you change it yourself, as long as you're keeping those things, you could still call it based on. Now, I'm going to still argue that some movies are not based on because they're too far different from the plot, because Romeo and Juliet need to die at the end. They do. Like, that's
holding on to that one important plot point.
Yes. Because how can you make a comedy out of something that is a tragedy and still call it the same thing? So, okay. So yeah, I think we got all of that. We're just going to agree to disagree on what is considered inspiration and not. Last thing, very important. You guys have anything you guys want to sponsor? Put out into the universe?
Yeah, I design websites at a company called Media Queries, and you should check us out if you need a website.
Very cool. That's the same one that Steph was in. They work together. It's like if you see that they're the same ones, if you listen to this, that's why they work together. Steph recommended Iris for this.
I thought you were looking at me like I'm gonna have something. I work in the theater. Everything moves so fast by the time this comes out. What I'm working on now is not going to be happening. So come see live theater. Support live theater. Yeah. We love you.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Great. Well, this has been Mr. Dima's Pop Culture Queries. If you guys have any ideas for a podcast, just send me a question in the comments and we'll see what we can do with that. Okay. Thank you. Bye.